let's talk about Jalen and in regard, obviously, Kellen Moore leaving.
Yes. Um, you know, it's it's really interesting to talk about the question that's on the screen right now. How does not just a Super Bowl, but Super Bowl MVP change the perception of Jalen Hurts? It's a fascinating question because I feel like there's so many different avenues and roads, whatever, that you could go down. You know, because now you have to include his name when you say who's beaten Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. It's Tom Brady 2 times, it's Joe Burrow, and it's Jalen Hurts. Josh Allen can't say that. Lamar Jackson can't say that. You know, but here's the other thing. I I know that Joe Burrow is in that discussion, but you got to put Jalen Hurts ahead of Joe Burrow because Joe Burrow got to a Super Bowl, but he lost to Matthew Stafford. Jalen Hurts got to a Super Bowl, outplayed Patrick Mahomes, lost, gets back to a Super Bowl 2 years later, outplays Mahomes again, and wins this time. So for me, you have to put Jalen Hurts ahead of guys like Lamar, Josh Allen, and Joe Burrow, even though some of them have more accolades than Jalen Hurts. But because Jalen, I'll use the quote from leading up to WrestleMania last year, which was in Philadelphia, but because Jalen Hurts finished the story, I feel like you have to put him ahead of Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, because again, of who he beat in the Super Bowl, the quarterback who was on the opposing side, he he didn't have to throw 40, 50, 60 times in the game. You know, he had a respectable, like, I don't remember his exact yardage, but it was respectable. I wouldn't say it was anything like, oh my God.
I thought it was close to 250.
Yeah. But you get what I'm saying, though?
Well, it's funny. You're saying all that, and I agree with you, but I'm going to tell you something. There are going to be people still saying Jalen Hurts isn't even the best quarterback in his own conference, in his own division. That's what they're going to say. I guarantee you there are people on the air today across sports media that will still take Jaden Daniels over Jalen Hurts.
I've Let me just say this. I I think it's a bit of a wider gap between Jaden Daniels and Jalen Hurts. But would you agree that within the NFC East, it's clear cut,
Oh,
not
that was clear. I'm going to be completely honest with you.
okay?
That was clear in the preseason of this year. That's how
Okay.
good I thought Jaden Daniels could be. That's why I picked Washington to finish second over Dallas.
Okay, so you agree with me that it's Jalen Hurts. I would put Jaden Daniels about here, and then it's Dallas and
Based off the regular season, because I could hear arguments during the regular season. Jalen wasn't playing that well. Jaden was so good that Jaden was having a better season than Jalen.
okay.
That I agreed with. I think we struggle in the media with like CJ Stroud, right? He had such a good year last year. Some people wanted to make him a top five quarterback. You can have great years. It doesn't mean that you're overall better because you don't have the experience. Jalen Hurts does have the experience. He's been doubted his whole career. I mean, he was doubted in Alabama. He was benched for Tua. He had to transfer to Oklahoma. He backed up Carson Wentz. In 2021 and 2022, they said he couldn't throw. They said Philadelphia needed to move on and find a quarterback between Deshaun Watson and Russell Wilson. And then last year with the turnovers, they said Jalen Hurts' Super Bowl year was a lucky year. He's never going to get back to that level. Guess what? He did. And he did exactly what he said he was going to do. And that was, like you said, Josh, finish the story.
Um, and the interesting thing with Philadelphia, as long as they keep, you know, the system in place that got them to this Super Bowl, you know, running the football primarily with Saquon, having Jalen throw about 30 times a game, not going crazy with it, keeping your receivers happy. You don't need to put up, 500 yards of offense as a quarterback. I mean, you don't
So
need to do that.
I'll be the first one to say I am so glad that we won this year's Super Bowl because I think next year is going to be hard. Um, Next year's schedule that we have is a murderer's row. We have to go to Kansas City for the Super Bowl rematch. We have to go to Buffalo. We have to play the entire NFC North. We have to go to Green Bay. We have to go to Minnesota. We host Detroit. We host Chicago. Um,
You have to host Denver. You have to host the Rams.
we have to go to the Chargers. We have to play Washington twice. We have to play Dallas twice. And no matter what you think of Dallas, they're a. So my point is, like, I think this 14-3 regular season magical run, like right now as I'm sitting here, I think we're gonna win 10 games. I think we're gonna have a little bit of a Super Bowl hangover. Like today, no free agency moves, no nothing. I would not be surprised if Washington wins the division next year. And I think there is always a Super Bowl win pullback outside of Kansas City. Even New England, when they won next year, they weren't always as dominant. Um, I think this team is good. I think that Jalen Hurts will be scrutinized more. And again, I don't think Jalen Hurts always plays great week to week, but I think Jalen Hurts shows up and he plays well when it matters. And the most important thing he did this year, and I hope it continues with whatever coordinator is coaching him next year, is cutting back on the turnovers. He had 5 before the bye week, week 4. He had 2 the rest of the season.
So what I will say is, I was one of the people, as you quoted me, saying like, "Will the real Jalen Hurts please stand up?" I feel like all that criticism leading up to this game, leading up to it.
It wasn't just this year. It was all last year. It
But
started during the supernatural funk. It started when this guy that we can now kill this meme because Coach Petzo was officially dead to me. But it started with that supernatural funk last year.
okay, but I'm just talking about just this season,
Okay.
just this season, taking last season out of the equation for sake of conversation. I understand why you brought it up though. Based on what I had seen of him, it was like I'm not sure who the real Jalen Hurts is. Like leading up to this game, so and I felt like the criticisms he was getting were valid based off of what I was seeing of him, in these games, whether it was against Atlanta on Monday Night Football or he didn't have a dominant performance against us in week 6. And there are a few other games I could point to. So I don't think the criticism that he faced during just this season was invalid. Did he put most of that criticism to rest after this game? Yes. I'm totally giving him his credit. I'm not trying to take anything away from him. I'm just simply saying the criticism and some of the negativity that came his way just based on this season was valid until he pushed back in the way he did.
Okay.
Is that
So
fair to say?
maybe it's because I'm a fan and I watch obviously all 17 plus 4, 21 Philadelphia Eagles game, 60 minutes times 21. Well, 60, like 1,200 minutes total of Philadelphia Eagles football this year. But I just think that Jalen, Sirianni, the whole team, like, and it's not just you, Josh, because everybody was saying it outside of me and a couple people that I think you watch Buffalo right now, explosive they are, and how good Josh Allen is, and you watch Kansas City, and you watch, even Cincinnati and Burrow and Chase and that explosive offense, and you watch Jalen Hurts, and you watch the Eagles, and it doesn't look the same, right? It doesn't look like they're as in sync as Buffalo or Kansas City or even a Cincinnati or even a Chargers, right, with Justin Herbert. Like, We watch all
or even
our
like a Denver to a certain extent.
Bo Nix, Lamar Jackson. Like you watch all those teams. They're more sexy, they're more flashier, and at times they dominated people like Philly. Or excuse me, they dominated people unlike the way Philadelphia was winning games. But I think the thing that people missed the most about this team was they just won games. They found a way to win. They won different ways. They won defensive games. They won offensive games. And they just kept nicking away, nicking away, nicking away. And then you look up in the first half, you're like, oh, Philly's losing. Philly's not playing well, or they're tired, or they only have 10 points. You look up at the end of the game and you go, how the hell did Philly beat the Rams 37-14? How the hell did Philly beat Baltimore 31-22? I think it was just hard for people to, in their minds, envision this team as a Super Bowl team because the beginning of the year, for whatever reason, I think it's because of part of what happened the year before, and the media just could not get it out of their heads. They thought that this team still had some funk in it somewhere, but it's like part of you was like, the Lions are so sexy, Baltimore is so sexy, Kansas City, Buffalo. That it's like, oh, the Philadelphia is not as good as them. When in reality, Philadelphia actually had a more talented team than all of them.
I, I will say this: when you played Baltimore, that was a pretty evenly matched game. I wouldn't say you
I
were.
would say Philly dominated the second half. I would agree with you on the first half. I think Baltimore missed some kicks. It could have been a closer game. But the moment this team became special for me was when Cooper DeJean took Derrick Henry and pile drove him to the ground. That was a statement. This team is different.
I think the game that made me realize the Eagles were legit. I'm trying to remember. Yes, it was the Sunday night game in LA against the
It's
Rams. Yeah,
crazy when you think about it. Do you know that was our only Sunday night game the whole year?
you're gonna get more this coming season. I can guarantee you that.
Well, obviously, we're gonna get Mike and Chris on opening night, which is on NBC.
Yes. Um, if I had to make, by the way, if I were scheduling the opening game for the Eagles, I would make it be against the Rams. That's just me.
Really,
Yes,
I think they're gonna make it Commanders
I wouldn't be surprised if it's Commanders or the Cowboys.
or
Uh,
or Detroit.
yeah, but I don't know. There was just something about the way you guys won that game against the Rams. I watched that and I'm like, okay, this team's actually legit. Like, I, there was just something about that Rams game. I can't tell you the exact reason, but I watched them like, okay, this team does have that Super Bowl tone or whatever word you want to use there.
Before we move on to our next topic, you know what's crazy? You know what I told you when it happened? And by the way, it still gives credit now that we won the Super Bowl. You know who played the best game against the Philadelphia Eagles all year long?
Who?
Carolina.
That's hilarious.
Bryce Young should have beat Philadelphia. Bryce Young was sensational. He played a better game against that Eagles defense than Joe Burrow did, Lamar Jackson did, Patrick Mahomes did.
That's true, yeah. I'd have to go back and look at the stats, but
Just watch the highlights. Watch Bryce Young, Dick and Dodge, Nick and Dodge, whatever word you want to say, Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith. Watch the throw he makes to Xavier Leggett in the end zone with about 43 seconds left. That probably would have won the game. Hits him right in the hands in the end zone.
yeah.
So, okay, well, let's talk about 26.
Yeah, because was he the clear missing piece for the Eagles? Because it's like you didn't have him last year, and we saw what happened. You had that epic collapse, and it resulted in a wild card loss to the Buccaneers. He comes, he signs with you over the offseason after the Giants were sure he wouldn't go to Philadelphia. Uh, and you go on to win a Super Bowl. So, was he the clear missing piece?
So I told a buddy of mine this. Miles Sanders was very good as a running back in Philadelphia, right?
Yeah,
DeAndre Swift was very good as a running back in Philadelphia, right?
yes.
The difference between those two backs and Saquon was those two backs would take, a 2, 3 yard carry, turn it into four. Saquon takes a 2, 3 yard carry, turns it into five. Takes an 8 yard carry, turns it into 10. Takes a 10 yard carry and turns it into 60. He was the best running back I've ever seen in an Eagles uniform. And I've seen Brian Westbrook. He's one of the reasons why I fell in love as an Eagle. And I've seen LaShawn McCoy. If you count the regular season and the playoffs, Saquon Barkley had the most rushing yards in the NFL of all time in the season. So it would be easy to say he was the clear missing piece. But I don't think it's fair to him to just put it on him alone and say that he was the clear missing piece.
Okay.
Because I think he was a missing piece. I think this team had multiple missing pieces. I think on the offensive side of the ball, he was the clear missing piece.
All right.
On the defense side of the ball, I think it was very clear those two corners, Quinyon Mitchell, and I'm even going to say Cooper DeJean, who was the number one ranked corner in the NFL this year by Pro Football Focus. Period. Stop. End of story. Those two rookies, plus you add in CJ Gardner Johnson back in the secondary, who brought toughness to that group. You add in Zach Bond, who was an outside linebacker and played special teams for the New Orleans Saints that everybody thought was just going to be a backup. Vic Fangio turned him into a middle linebacker, and he led the NFL in tackles. I thought he should have been the defensive player of the year, and he didn't even get a second place vote for it. You add in the fact that Nakobe Dean developed, went from this guy who was, a third round pick, very good at Georgia, but had injury concerns. He had over 100 tackles. And then you add in the depth of guys like Nolan Smith, who came on strong this year. Brandon Graham, Jackson Hunt, who I just said, Josh Sweat, Jordan Davis, Milton Williams. I think all of it came together. If you want to say on the field, Saquon was the clear missing piece, I hear you, I get it, I totally understand it. But don't take away from those other additions Howie Roseman made. And not only that, but the additions off the field, technically, of Kellen Moore's offensive coordinator, who adapted his scheme to fit what this Philadelphia team needed, and Vic Fangio as defensive coordinator.
So, I hear you on all the other additions, and I'm not as well versed in the Philadelphia Eagles, to be fair, because I'm not really a Eagles fan in the same manner you are, as you can tell. But I don't hate the Eagles by any extent. But from I just have to go based off of what I saw, because I couldn't watch every Eagles game. It felt like Saquon was the overall missing piece because of something you mentioned. Your defense, while they benefited a lot from those other players you mentioned, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, and many of the other, Zach Bond, and a lot of the others you mentioned, I think the reason your defense was able to be so dominant as they were throughout the season was because Philadelphia, or specifically Jalen Hurts, would just go, "Hey, Saquon, here you go," and they, instead of like a quick one play bomb to Devontae or AJ Brown. Excuse me. Philadelphia's offense was more of like a, I don't know, like a 10 play seven.
There was a drive. Do you remember the drive against Pittsburgh to end the game? When
Yes.
Pittsburgh punted the ball and with 10 minutes left at the Philadelphia 47, and they never got the ball back.
and that's exactly what I'm saying. Um, Again, not trying to take any credit away from what you guys did defensively, but I think a lot of that is because you got brought in a guy like Saquon, which allowed you to establish the run game. That made Jalen Hurts better as a runner
Yes.
because
Yes.
we
That
we
I
know,
agree with 100%, but it goes both ways too.
sure.
Jalen's presence outmakes Saquon. And the other thing I will say too, as great as Saquon is, he also did lead the league in rushing yards before contact. So that also has to do a lot with Jordan Mawaya, Landon Dickerson, Cam Jurgens, Mekhi Becton, who the Eagles took as a project. He was a left tackle with the Jets, moved into right guard, fit in seamlessly there. And then obviously Wayne Johnson, the right tackle. And Cam Jurgens, the center, a lot of people had questions about. Remember, that was the big topic that we had in the offseason. Could Cam Jurgens replace Jason Kelsey? Because that was a huge topic. Remember that? Oh, Philadelphia's offensive line is going to fall apart without Jason Kelsey. Guess what? This might have been the most dominant offensive line I've ever had in my life.
Yeah. So, but that's what I'm saying is like because your offensive line was so strong, that allowed your run game to be very effective. So you were able to put together drives of like 10 plays, 70 plus yards, keeping the ball for 5 plus minutes. That allowed your defense to rest up on the sidelines, get reinvigorated, so that guys like Nolan Smith, N'Kobe Dean, Zach Vaughn, Cooper DeJean, Quinyon Mitchell could go make the necessary plays that they did throughout the season.
I mean, how many times did I tell you, well, why are the Eagles punting? What went wrong? Because something had to go wrong for this team to punt. They were that talented. They could have scored on every drive if they wanted to.
I don't think we even heard the punter's name once for the Eagles during.
We punted early in the game. Remember when they pinned Mahomes back? It was 7-0.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, actually, no. Remember, it was 0-0 on the first drive because they called a phantom offensive pass interference call on A.J.
Yes.
Brown. And I said, oh, no, here we go.
Yep. I do remember that. I I did agree with the call only because AJ was like had his hands basically on the.
Well, I would have agreed with it too, and Mike Pereira would have agreed with it, but Pereira said it wasn't a foul.
It's so confusing these days when it comes to.
And then we got a makeup call on Goddard, which was not a foul at all, but I will gladly take it.
So.
By the way, for all those talking about the cheese of the refs, Jalen Carter smashed Patrick Mahomes' face and they didn't call it.
That's true.